You know that satisfying tactile clickiness of a PC gaming mouse? Well, Razer made a controller that does that too, and it's just as good as it sounds. Literally, because it sounds very clicky. What's happening, guys? Welcome back to another video, and today we're taking a look at the Razer Wolverine V3 Tournament Edition. And before we really get into it, Razer did send this controller over for review, but there are no strings attached. I've been using this as my main controller for the last week to give it a shot, and I've got to say, it's a very solid controller that also won't break the bank if you're looking for something that has a few extra bells and whistles. But it's not perfect either. Anyways, let's get into it. The Razer Wolverine V3 Tournament Edition is following the trend of third-party controllers packing in some extra functionality compared to the stock Xbox controllers. You've got 4 back paddles and trigger stops with that added little tactile bonus. And any controller that has back paddles has to have some kind of customization options, which is where this little button on the front of the controller comes in. This is basically your programming button. So you hold it down, tap the button or trigger you want to assign, and then tap the button that you want to map to that first button. So if I want the bottom back bumper to be my right thumbstick button, I just hit it with a little 1, 2, and 3, and we're good to go. But one of the big standout features for this controller that the Elite doesn't have is that it has an extra shoulder button just to the right of the standard buttons and triggers. So this just adds an extra macro that I'd assign for popping a healing potion in Diablo or using a kill streak in Call of Duty. This is by far the most convenient placement for an extra button in my opinion, because my fingers are already used to using buttons back there. For back paddles, I still have to actively think about using them and remember what buttons I assign to what paddle. So with these extra buttons, they're just extensions of what you already use when you play. So they're just nice additions to have here. And I've also just got to say, I love how easy this controller is to program on the fly. If I'm switching to another game and want to remap a back paddle, that program plus 2-button push combo takes seconds and is a lot better for me than having to dig into some custom software or even the Xbox accessories app to map my controller. On top of that, combining the program button with the D-pad lets you change the volume on your headset if it's plugged into the bottom of the controller, or you can change the haptic feedback that the controller gives back. And by the way, the rumble on this thing can be insane. Like, by the time you're done playing, it feels like you got a hand massage. It is crazy what they've packed in this thing. If you're really into haptic feedback, this controller will not disappoint. And hey, if you're not into it, then no worries. You can also just turn it down. And then we get to the thumbsticks. This thing is packing Hall effect thumbsticks, so you won't be experiencing any stick drift, and they say these thumbsticks are smoother, lighter, and more durable thanks to the anti-friction rings and pro-grade materials. Now I'm gonna keep it real with you. I don't know about all of that. I'm sure there's actual tech that stands behind all of those statements, but they're just good thumbsticks. And I will say they've got a little bit more of a concave to them compared to the standard Xbox wireless controller. A little more depth and grippiness, so that's a nice touch. Now, if you're playing on PC, you can also go into the Razer software and adjust the thumbstick sensitivity to really lock in on settings that work for you. But let's talk about that software. The Wolverine V3 Tournament Edition works with the Razer Controller Setup app and not Razer Synapse. This app you download from the Microsoft Store is exactly the same as the app that's on Xbox, and boy, is it just not great. It's pretty much on par with the Xbox accessories app, but it gives you another way to customize the button mapping along with tweaking that thumbstick sensitivity and movement curve. And make no mistake, you don't really need to get into this app to use this controller. In fact, I think it's easier to map the buttons on the controller itself rather than going into the setup app. But the app does have profile presets, so if you're switching between competitive games, Razer does have something that's basically the equivalent of the Elite Series 2's profiles. If you're willing to hunt down that app, pop open the software and change those settings instead of just toggling a button on the controller, because it does not have that. Now that's an inconvenience, but again, if you're like me and just change button assignments occasionally but keep most of those core settings the same once you've dialed in on what feels good, then this is really not that big of a problem. But boy, that software really needs some work. Now in the app on the PC side, you can also enable a 1000 Hz polling rate that should give you lower latency compared to a standard Xbox controller. But is this something that actually matters? It kind of depends on what kind of player you are. Keep in mind, this is a tournament edition controller, so the features that it packs in are designed with the hyper-competitive players in mind. And let me tell you, that is not me. You can check my KD. But based on some quick Googling, the Xbox wireless controller should have a polling rate of around 124 Hz. So you're looking at a pretty significant increase to 1000 that basically puts this thing on par with the polling rate of a standard gaming mouse. Again, if you're just casually playing games or just running some matches and have this enabled, you may or may not notice a difference. But if you're making split millisecond decisions and are an omni movement god in Black Ops 6, well, this might take your game to the next level, if you really pay attention to how you play and how fast you're moving. But keep in mind that higher polling rate is only on PC with the software enabled, so if you're looking for that kind of tech on consoles, this is not going to do the job. But love it or hate it, that's where the wired connection comes in. The Razer Wolverine V3 Tournament Edition is a wired controller with a 10-foot detachable USB-C cable packed in the box. And if you're someone who lives and dies by wireless controllers, there is the Wolverine V3 Pro. That's double the price of the Tournament Edition, but that gives you that wireless console connectivity with all the same functionality. But if you don't mind having that cable, then you're technically getting something that should give you lower latency compared to Xbox's proprietary controller tech because you're plugging directly into the console. So you take the wins with the losses. If you're playing at your desk or relatively close to your entertainment setup in the living room, the 10-foot USB-C is more than enough to get the job done. But the big deal with this controller is the tactile feel of basically everything. The face buttons, the D-pad, even the triggers on the back when the trigger stumps are enabled have that Razer tactile feedback to them that just makes this feel different than most Xbox controllers. As soon as I picked it up, I felt that premium feel, but it's also light since there isn't any kind of built-in battery or battery pack that weighs it down in the back. Now in the looks department, the Wolverine V3 Tournament Edition is about as bare bones as it gets. The Pro has a Razer logo in the middle of the face that lights up, but the Tournament Edition keeps things simple with matte black and basically no lights. Even the Xbox button doesn't light up. This thing is really all about the functionality and not the frills. But my experience also hasn't been perfect. The one issue I've run into is the controller just disconnected one night when I was playing, and this is something others online have experienced too. When I was playing Dragon Age the Veilguard and would get killed in a boss fight, I would just load back into the game and my controller would just not be working anymore. It wouldn't say not recognized or no controller connected on the console, it just literally wasn't receiving any inputs. I'm talking no Xbox button functionality, no game interaction, nothing. And then I'd unplug the controller and the Xbox would recognize that a controller had been disconnected. And then I'd plug it back in and I'd be good to go. Some people online are blaming this on the USB-C port, and it's definitely not as sturdy as something like the Hyperkin Duchess, where it almost feels like it's built into the controller itself. But I want to do more testing before really chalking it up to anything in particular, and it only happened during one of my play sessions in one game. Hasn't happened since when I tried to replicate it in Black Ops 6, but I still wanted to call it out because it's something other people have seen and I saw it too, so take it for what you will. For me, this controller is right in the middle of the pack. You've got something like the wired GameSir G7 with 2 back paddles and trigger modes for $50. And then there's the wireless Elite Series 2 with 4 back paddles for $150. So the Razer is right in the middle at $100, which is why it ultimately comes down to the clickiness. That's what this controller is really all about. And I gotta say it one more time, the extra shoulder buttons are great. Like, more companies need to be adding shoulder buttons to controllers because it just feels so natural. But the feel of this controller is really what makes it stand out. And that functionality to quickly remap controls on the fly is a very smart way to handle not having onboard profiles. And I don't feel any worse off for not having onboard profiles. Other than those connectivity issues, this controller looks great and feels good. It packs a ton of functionality into a very simple design that won't break the bank. That's a pretty good trifecta, and if you don't mind having a wired controller for your console or PC, pretty solid pick. But that's just my experience with the Razer V3 Tournament Edition after 1 week, and again, big thanks to Razer for sending this one over for me to check out. I'd love to know what you think down below though. Does this controller pack enough features to warrant $100, or would you rather splash the cash on something fancier or save the cash on something cheaper? Let me know your thoughts. And of course, if you're new here, you like what you see and what you hear, hit that subscribe button for videos like this every week and gaming news shorts throughout the week to keep you in the loop, and I'll catch you on the next one.